Steven Seagal was once touted as an action star, martial arts expertise, and larger-than-life Hollywood tough guy. With hits like Under Siege and The Glimmer Man, he became a staple in the pantheon of 1990s action cinema. But behind the scenes, his reputation was anything but heroic. With stories of bizarre behavior, on-set intimidation, disturbing allegations, and explosive feuds that followed him for decades. Over time, the accounts painted a picture of a man many in Hollywood actively avoided. This video talks about the celebrities who didn't mince words in their clashes with Seagal, reasons why they couldn't stand him, and infamous incidents that cemented his status as one of Tinseltown's most disliked figures. 1. Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron never minced words when Steven Seagal's name came up. In a 2020 appearance with Howard Stern, she laughed openly at clips showing Seagal awkwardly shoving stunt performers instead of executing real fight choreography. She mocked his physical condition and dismissed his supposed fighting ability as ridiculous. But her criticism turned sharp when the conversation shifted to the many women who accused Seagal of misconduct. Theron bluntly stated that he was not nice to women and made clear that she had no hesitation criticizing him publicly. She concluded with a profanity-laden dismissal that definitely ranked as one of the few times an A-list star was overt in attacking Seagal, without fear or abandon. 2. Liam Neeson's. Liam Neeson's takedown of Seagal was quieter, but no less cutting. Appearing on Jimmy Kimmel Live, Neeson was asked whether he'd ever worked with Seagal. His response was instant and devastating, joking that he wanted to know who dyed Seagal's hair, followed by a punchline invoking Stevie Wonder. The laughter masked genuine irritation. Neeson recalled later being blindsided by a journalist who quoted Seagal claiming Neeson didn't know how to punch. As a former boxer, Neeson was offended. Kimmel piled on with jokes about Seagal's time in Russia, suggesting perhaps Hollywood had quietly sent him away. Every line landed like a clean hit. 3. John Leguizamo's. The experience John Leguizamo had at the hands of Seagal crossed from ego into physical violence. On the first day of rehearsals for Executive Decision, Seagal announced he was in charge and his word was law. John laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Without warning, Seagal slammed him against a brick wall with an Aikido elbow, knocking the air out of him. Lying on the floor gasping, Leguizamo could only ask why. Years later, he would turn the humiliation into comedy during his Broadway show Ghetto Clown, while mocking Seagal's fighting style and infamous running. When Seagal reportedly threatened him over the jokes, Leguizamo fired back, pointing out that Seagal wasn't invited to many red carpets anyway and questioning how someone could rise from a working-class martial arts background into such an egomaniacal diva. 4. Julianna Margulies. Julianna Margulies has called her sole meeting with Steven Seagal one that permanently altered how she maneuvered her way through Hollywood. When still starting to establish her career and auditioning for Out for Justice, she agreed to meet him in his hotel room, a thing considered normal then. Once seated, she felt something hard under a cushion. Seagal coolly pulled out a gun and placed it on the nightstand. He then leaned in and claimed he was a healer, offering to read her palm. As the situation was getting increasingly disturbing with a loaded weapon nearby, Margulies quickly fled the room. Years later, she mused, it may have saved her. When Harvey Weinstein later requested to see her privately under similar circumstances, she refused without incident. 5. Portia de Rossi's. Similarly disturbing was the pattern of Portia de Rossi. Early in her career, she thought she was going for a real final audition with Seagal. Instead, he made some vague comments about chemistry, and then unzipped his leather pants without warning. De Rossi ran away immediately. The line was even worse when she phoned her agent, expecting outrage. Her agent's chillingly casual response suggested that maybe Seagal was just not into her type. That reaction exposed a much larger problem within the industry, where that kind of behavior was tolerated or dismissed. Years later, at the height of the Me Too movement, de Rossi spoke of her incident publicly. Ellen DeGeneres amplified her wife's story, proud of her speaking out. 6. Ronda Rousey's. Ronda Rousey's hatred for Seagal is deeply personal and goes back to martial arts history. Her uncle, legend judoka Gene LeBell, once choked Seagal unconscious on set, a moment that ended with Seagal losing control of his bowels. The story became a whispered Hollywood legend. Rousey never forgot it. She later said that even in old age, her uncle could still take down Seagal. She added her own warning. If Seagal ever insulted Lavelle in front of her, she'd personally make sure history repeated itself. It was not delivered as a joke, but as a promise. 7. Ray Dawn Chung. To the myriad of such accusations came another gut-wrenching account by Ray Dawn Chung. She said that during the 1980s, her agency sent her to the Bel Air Hotel for a late-night meeting. When she went there, she found Seagal waiting in his room. Realizing it was a setup, she refused to enter. Standing in the doorway, she watched as Seagal appeared in a robe, sat down with his legs spread, and only casually covered himself after exposing everything. When he asked if her blouse was silk and whether he could touch it, she fired back with a sharp remark and left. Later, Chung articulated quite clearly that she never let him get his hands on her, and that she would have killed him if he had tried it. 8. Jean-Claude Van Damme. This is a 2-decade feud between Steven Seagal and Jean-Claude Van Damme, peppered with insults and bravado. Seagal publicly ridiculed Van Damme's fighting credentials on the Arsenio Hall show and later sneered, "Can I laugh in your face?" when asked whether Van Damme could beat him in a real fight. On his own reality show, Seagal bragged that any confrontation would be like squashing an ant. But, according to Sylvester Stallone, the reality was very different. At a 1997 party, Van Damme finally snapped after years of jabs and challenged Seagal to fight in Stallone's backyard. Seagal reportedly fled. When Van Damme confronted him again later at a nightclub, Seagal vanished for a second time. As Stallone said quite bluntly, because Van Damme was too strong, and Seagal wanted no part of it. 9. The cast of SNL Steven Seagal's 1991 appearance on Saturday Night Live remains one of the worst hosting gigs in the show's history. Cast members would later recall him as being humorless, defensive, and impossible to work with. Tim Meadows remembered Seagal just constantly complaining about jokes that he didn't get. Julia Sweeney referred to his behavior as legendary craziness once he locked himself in his dressing room after a sketch suggested that Hans and Franz could beat him up. David Spade summed it up best by saying Seagal refused to play along. Even executive producer Lorne Michaels took a public shot at him. When Nicolas Cage joked that viewers might think he was the biggest jerk ever to host the show, Michaels didn't hesitate to respond. That would be Steven Seagal. 10. DMX. DMX's experience with Steven Seagal was far from the respectful partnership Seagal later described in public. While Seagal called DMX a gentleman who was thoughtful and gentle, the rapper remembered something entirely different. In a stunningly blunt interview, DMX mocked Seagal's appearance and likened the way he spoke to an old slave master. He said that he and his wife joked about Seagal behind his back, eventually summing him up with a single word that made his feelings unmistakably clear. Despite the hostility, Hollywood practicality won out, and the two reunited years later for Beyond the Law, proving even ugly grudges can be overridden by a paycheck. 11. Jenny McCarthy's audition for Under Siege 2 turned into a nightmare she still speaks about decades later. According to her, the audition with Seagal became completely derailed when he asked personal questions. Then, he told her to get up and take off her dress, since there was nudity in it. When she refused, pointing out there was no nudity in the script, he kept insisting until she burst into tears and ran out, shouting an insult at him. McCarthy later claimed that as she reached her car, Seagal grabbed her and warned her not to tell anyone. Years later, she has not softened her stance, saying that if she saw him again, she would still confront him and tell him to change his ways. 12. George Foreman. Even heavyweight boxing legend George Foreman entered the Seagal drama, quite literally. In 2017, at the age of 69, Foreman publicly challenged Seagal to a 10-round fight in Las Vegas. He said Seagal could use whatever fighting style he wanted and confidently predicted he would knock him out within 1 or 2 rounds. Talks with Seagal's manager were rumored to have begun, but Seagal himself never responded, reportedly spending much of his time in Russia. The fight never happened, but Foreman never backed off his belief that Seagal would not last long in the ring. 13. Rachel Grant, best known for Die Another Day, was one of many claims against Steven Seagal that became public in 2018. She had claimed that following a 2002 audition for Out for a Kill, she was flown to Bulgaria to rehearse with him, only for the meeting to take a dark turn. Grant said Seagal repeatedly told her to remove her top, and when she refused, he pulled down her strapless shirt himself. She recalled being pushed onto a bed as he began unzipping his pants, stopping only when she burst into tears. Shaken and humiliated, she later questioned what actress should ever be brought to someone's bedroom during a first meeting and told to take her top off. The role ultimately went to someone else, and Seagal's lawyers denied the allegations entirely. 14. Chuck Norris never publicly feuded with Steven Seagal, but the tension between them was always palpable. Someone as deeply ingrained in the martial arts world as Norris was, and knowing of Bob Wall's well-documented, long-standing feud with Seagal, knew precisely what kind of reputation Seagal had. When Dick Cavett asked him, in 1993, how good Seagal really was, Norris replied very guardedly, indicating that Seagal's films utilized tight shots and rapid cuts that masked any real technique being utilized. However, when Cavett brought up a story of a martial artist who was belligerent toward him in a bookstore, Norris immediately shot back, "Was it Steven Seagal?" When asked humorously if Seagal's threatening personality was all an act, Norris just smiled and acknowledged it carried over into his real life. Asked Riley if Seagal had ever dared to attack him, Norris said with the coldest line of them all, simply, "Seagal wouldn't dare." These stories are only part of the long trail of controversies, grudges, and feuds that have followed Steven Seagal throughout his career. Some see him as a misunderstood martial arts icon, while others believe he has fully earned the bad blood directed at him from so many corners of Hollywood and beyond. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the celebrities who openly despise Steven Seagal, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video uncovering Hollywood's most shocking rivalries.